Hey guys, I am Daisho, and I am here bringing you... I don't even know what this video is. I'm just going to be talking for a while because I felt like talking after I managed to finally get to Legend. I was really excited about it, and I guess I will detail my trek to Legend. So first I just wanted to say that the first two seasons I didn't play that much. I played a good amount and I made it to like rank 5 and rank 4 and kind of got stuck there and never really made a real push for Legend. This time I did. I played a ton of games, and it probably took me just about as many games as any of the Legends, if not more, than any of the other ones to actually make it here, because I definitely struggled a lot along the way. So I think the first, I don't know, 15 levels or whatever to rank 10 were not a huge struggle, but they didn't go as smoothly as I had wanted them to. I wasn't getting the huge win streaks that I liked. I mean, I was getting win streaks for like 5 or 6 games in a row, but then I just lost a couple, and then, you know, I don't know, it didn't go as well as I had hoped. And then I actually got stuck at like rank 10 or 11 for a couple of days, and I'm pulling up my spreadsheet on the side here, so that's why you're gonna hear some clicking, if that's all right. But basically, once I got to rank 10, I don't remember what I was playing before. That was just whatever junk, maybe like some shaman stuff, or like some druid murlocs or something like that, or just like aggro warrior or something. But then to get from ranks 10 to 5, I used a druid mid-range deck, and that one here, I'll pull it up. I have basically the list, my collection. Yeah, so I used this Druid mid-range list, and pretty much the same thing. I think at one point I was not running this Azure Drake and I was running another Spellbreaker, and you know, I switched a couple of cards here and there, but this is pretty much the list that I ran. It's a really cool deck, and it's good depending on what the metagame is. So it's pretty bad against control and like dedicated good control decks. So the Warlock control just basically does more things than you and is able to beat you, and the Warrior control too. For a while, when Warrior control was very popular, I had a Big Game Hunter, and then that's when the Faceless Manipulator came in also. And those two cards really help you in that matchup because you need to take care of Ragnaros, and you can tank it, but you can also, but Big Game Huntering it is just as good of an option. And you need your Tink Master for your Sarah, or Sylvanas or Cairn or something like that. So there's a lot of really difficult things to deal with, and Druid is not typically known as being the best for spot removal, like no access to Hex or anything, or Polymorph, or Siphon Soul even, or an Assassinate, something like that. It doesn't have the best control cards. But one thing that this deck does do is it beats up on the fringe decks. So when I was playing against, probably in like ranks 10 to 5 priest control decks, when you play against legends who have priest control decks and they know what they're doing and they're pretty good. But when your opponent doesn't come in with like a perfect deck, so when I was playing against priest control or mage control aggro, those kind of things where my opponent didn't know exactly what he was doing, I just destroyed them. And I was like 4-0 against mage, or 5-0 against mage, 2-0 against priest in my trek down. And actually, it looks like, pretty ironically, I played exactly 100 games with this Druid mid-range deck, and I won 61 of them, so 61% of the games, which is alright. It's not insane or anything, but it just proves or shows the quality of the deck. It's kind of like just overall a powerful deck. It does a lot of good stuff, playing Ancient Watchers early and innervating out either Keeper of the Grove or Spellbreaker, so you can start attacking with your Chillwind Yetis on turn 2 if you coin out the Ancient Watcher and then innervate out the Keeper or the Spellbreaker. Additionally, it's pretty good against control because it has big creatures with 2 Sun Furies, 2 Defenders, and it doesn't have that much removal, but it is playing Wraths and Swipes. I don't have Azure Drakes. I have one Azure Drake and no Blood Mage Thalanos, so it doesn't have the spell damage, so I can actually get like 5 damage and 2 to all enemies swipes. Of course, the two most important things in the deck are, well, the Ancient of Lore, which is just your best card in the deck. I mean, it draws 2 cards. It's one of the most powerful cards in the game. definitely, I think it's the most powerful non-legendary. I would go as far as to say. I'm not saying that it's the best card, but I think the most powerful in that it has the most impact on the game when it hits the table, outside of some of the legendaries maybe. But anyway, continuing, the other most important thing is Force of Nature Savage Roar, which is really interesting because in Hearthstone, in Magic the Gathering, which for those of you who haven't seen this, who haven't seen me before, I'm mostly a Magic the Gathering player until I got into Hearthstone. But anyway, in that game, you don't ever want to run 2 1-ofs and hope that you manage to draw them in the exact same turn, because these cards are largely only good together. Savage Roar is playable, and it's really important to understand when you're not going to be able to combo, and you can use Savage Roar so that you can kill some of their creatures or something like that against an aggro deck. And Force of Nature is just very overcosted for what it does, but when you combine them, then you can kill your opponent out of nowhere, and that really helps against the Hunter aggro decks and stuff like that, because basically what they end up doing is they take you down to like 12 with their primary plan, the aggression, the haste creatures and stuff, and then you set up your taunts and you get your defenses up, and sometimes they can combo and they can get their Unleash the Hounds and Starving Buzzard, and then they restock their hand and they're about to kill you in a couple of turns. But what you do is instead you just start comboing off yourself, and you Force of Nature Savage Roar if you manage to draw both of them, which is pretty likely in a 30-card deck. I mean, it's not very likely, but you're going to draw a lot of your cards. You have your Ancient of Lords. Some decks are running more than just Azure Drake. But you want this game to go long. You also have Pagel and Wrath. So you can cycle through your deck fairly quickly. And if you do all that, then you can actually get your combo off and kill them in one turn. Not very early, but turn 9, turn 10, something like that. You can actually just kill them, which is pretty important in this deck for managing to survive. Because it's pretty easy to survive until turn 5 against Paladin aggro or Hunter aggro, but once you get to that point, then it gets pretty difficult. Anyway, another thing that I thought this deck had trouble with was Rogue. Miracle Rogue, Rogue aggro, either of them. It just seems like the cards that they had were well suited to deal with the cards that I had, but to be honest, I really didn't play against them that much. I played against like 1 Miracle Rogue with this deck and a few aggro Rogue decks. Outside of those, the decks the Druid mid-range decks and the Druid control decks, and I played against one of the Druid swarm decks, those were pretty even overall. I mean, I went 5-2 in the Druid control, 7-5 in the Druid mid-range, and lost the Druid swarm deck. So it was pretty close throughout the whole Druid mid-range thing. And I mean, maybe I was a little more suited for the mirror matchup, or maybe I just got lucky and that was how you handled it. But yeah, the real advantage came from the fact that this deck was very good against Paladin aggro and Hunter aggro, as well as Warlock aggro, either Murlocs or just aggressive creatures. And those are really how I won most of my games. So when I was playing against something like Shaman control or Warlock control or Warrior control, I was losing all my games, or not all of them, but I was like winning half them, which is obviously not going to progress you at all in the ladder. And when I was playing against aggro decks, I was winning all my games. So this deck is really just like the center for mid-range. Generally, what mid-range does is it is playing an aggro deck, but it's just a touch slower and more powerful. So it does better things, and it can deal with the things, but it's also still fast enough so that it doesn't get run over. And it's not quite powerful enough to deal with the control decks that, for instance, the Warlock control decks can just play Giants go over the top of you. The Warrior control decks can deal with your guys pretty easily with shield blocks and shield slams, as well as executes, and their weapons even kill most of your creatures. Like an Arcanite Reaper can take out any creature in this deck except for Druid of the Claw, because the biggest thing that you have is Ancient of Lore, and outside of that you just have a whole bunch of Chillwind Yetis. Like that's basically the idea for this deck, is you play a Chillwind Yeti at every spot in the curve. So you've got the Ancient Watcher, which is your 2-mana Chillwind Yeti, 4-mana Chillwind Yeti, Black Knight is your 6-mana Chillwind Yeti, as well as Karn, but I don't have any, so that's why I am not running him. And Druid of the Claw is a 5/6, so he's like honorary Chillwind Yeti, I think. But anyway, that's basically what I wanted to say, is getting from 10 to 5 was pretty easy with this deck. I was playing against some decks that were fringe, people didn't really play much of them, and this deck stomps those because it just has very high power level. And there was also a good amount of aggro decks and not too many huge control decks. So getting from 10 to 5 was pretty easy with this deck. After that, I got stuck on 5 for a long, long time. Probably, I don't know, 60, 75 games or something like that. Not just with this deck, but I was alternating with others. And eventually, I switched up. I was playing some Druid Swarm, which I think took me from 5 to 4, but then I fell back to 5. And at some point, I was playing some Spell Power Rogue, but not really that much. I was playing some Murlocs, and I remember one day I built 2 decks. I built the Murloc deck. The Warlock Murlocs is just, I don't even know if this is a good list. It's just one that I built. So I was playing this deck, and I was like alternating almost every game, and I was playing, I think, a different version of this Shaman Control deck. One that was specifically designed only to beat Murlocs. And then basically what happened is I alternated. So every time I played with the Murloc deck, I got the Murloc Mirror and lost all of them. So I think I lost 5 games of that. And then every time I played with this Shaman Control deck, which was specifically designed, I think this is actually the version, specifically designed to beat Murlocs, I got paired against another control deck, and this deck is just ill-suited to deal with them. Maybe it's not. This has 2 Mana-Tide Totem. I don't think that Mana-Tide Totem is good against Murlocs, but this is not how I would recommend building a Shaman Control deck if you're trying to rank up. So anyway, I switched to a couple of different decks, and eventually I came back to Druid midrange, and it took me from ranks 5 to 3, like 3 1-star, I think. And then, I mean, I was not stuck on 3 1-star for very long. I decided to pick up a different deck, a Hunter aggro deck. And I played a couple of games with it, went to bed, and then the next morning, which was 2 days ago, I think. Yeah, my trip from 10 to 3 was probably like, I probably played like 15 times as many games as from 3 to 1, or from 3 to Legend rather. But anyway, which is strange because you'd expect that 3 to Legend would be very, very difficult, but whatever, I mean. Anyway, so I found this deck, Sulfuric Vortex. Shout out to Magic the Gathering. Sulfuric Vortex is an enchantment that basically just deals 2 damage to your opponent every turn. So you have your steady shot, and that's really the goal in this deck. You want to be shooting them every single turn. And one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video, other than brag about how I got to Legend, because it's making me really happy right now, is that I want to take care of what I think is a misnomer, that this deck is easy to play. Because in the course of my playing this deck from 3 to Legend, I misplayed a ton, and I was able to recognize it as I was doing it, and I was like, wow, I mean, if I had just done something slightly different 2 turns ago, then I could have had an extra card, which is just such a huge advantage in this kind of matchup. So I'm just going to pull up the stats for this this Hunter aggro deck, because, I mean, I played a couple of games with it before, but in the end I had a 69% winning percentage, which is kind of incredible. It means that I won more than 2 out of 3 games, so I won more than twice as many than I lost, which is really, really difficult to do. But basically, I ignored this deck and didn't play it because its Druid midrange matchup was just completely terrible. And then I heard somebody talking about Freezing Trap. I like saw one of my opponents play Freezing Trap against me, and then I heard somebody saying, "Oh yeah, some people are trying to use Freezing Trap in their Hunter decks, and you know it's okay." And then I decided to try it out, and my God, this thing is just a godsend for this matchup. When your opponents innervate out a Chillwind Yeti on turn 2, and you play a Freezing Trap, you just took 2 cards out of their hand for one of yours, and those were really good cards, and this is just a 2-mana spell that you weren't going to do anything anyway. I ended up going 9-2 in the Druid midrange matchup from ranks 3 to Legend, so I was mostly playing against legendary opponents or 1-star, or like rank 1, 2 rank 2 or something like that. So I mean, this deck is just really powerful. So a couple of the things that I wanted to mention about this deck, if you are trying to play it, it's not always important to play like Wolf Rider on turn 3. Your opponent's almost always going to have a way to kill an X1 pretty easily without real damage, so it's often better to just wait until turn 5 and just keep shooting until then. The card that is also often misplayed is Eagle Hornbow, because basically your tendency is to just play this card out and then attack with it right away because you can get more durability. But basically you want to wait until you can shoot, and also Eagle Horn Bow, because if you just play it and attack and you don't have a secret out, then the next turn you can play a secret, but you're just going to skip an attack. So if you skip an attack the next turn and you could have shot the first turn and you wasted crystals, then that is really bad. So basically you want to maximize the amount of turns that you do use your steady shot with this deck, and that's one of the most important things. And oh yeah, one thing that I did want to mention. So this deck seems like a mindless aggro deck when you just say Hunter aggro or whatever, but it ends up really being more of a combo deck, because there are a lot of different interactions and combos that you can use with this deck to beat your opponents. So basically, it doesn't really, what the traditional aggro deck is just a whole bunch of copies of primarily the same card, a card that does almost the same thing and it's one-dimensional, and that's basically it. This deck has almost none of those. So these traps all do different things. They're all good in different circumstances. Secret Keeper and Leper Gnome are two very different creatures. Leper Gnome is basically just a burn spell. You're going to get 2 or 4 damage in with it, and it will almost do nothing basically. Whereas Secret Keeper is a source of consistent damage if you play it correctly. If you play it on turn 1 and then you can play a freezing trap on turn 2, then your opponent has to use a spell out of their hand to kill it. Then they might be tempted to try and play a creature and trade with it. Then they attack with their creature, and then all of a sudden they find themselves taking 5-8 damage from this thing, and it can really get out of hand very quickly. Then there's Starving Buzzard, Unleash the Hounds, and Timberwolf, which all go together basically, and that's just one of your combos in your deck. And as I was saying earlier, in Hearthstone with 30 card decks and drawing a full card per turn instead of drawing lands or something like that, you really are able to get your combo pieces assembled pretty easily. And when one of your combo pieces, Starving Buzzard, draws you 3 to 5 cards, or like 2 to 5 cards or something like that every time you play it, because you're always going to have the Unleash the Hounds when you play it, and you almost never play this card without it. One time earlier, actually I was 5 stars rank 1, and I had Starving Buzzard and 2 Timberwolves in hand, and my opponent was about to kill me the next turn, so I had to just play Starving Buzzard, then Timberwolf, and then the second Timberwolf, and then I finally drew the Unleash, which there was like 8 cards left in my deck and 2 copies of Unleash left, so it was pretty ridiculous that I hadn't seen one yet, and I was not likely to draw it, but definitely a reasonable chance to draw it. Anyway, I had still ended up losing that game somehow. I think I was 1 point of damage short, and then he Thought Stealed, stole a random animal companion and an Unleash the Hounds, and he played the random animal companion, got Leok, which is the one that gives raid leaders their team gives them +1, attacked me with Unleash the Hounds for 3 or something like that, and ended up killing me exactly when I easily would have had lethal the next turn. But anyway, continuing, talking about Starving Buzzard, one of your Starving Buzzards always draws you into other cards. You're never going to play it alone. I don't know if I wanted to mention anything else. But anyway, this is also like a combo piece. You can combo kill them. They took away the traditional one-turn kill Hunter deck, where you, for those of you who haven't played since then, Unleash the Hounds used to be, gives all your beasts +1, +0 and charge, I think. Yeah, +1/+0 and charge for the turn. So it gives all your beasts that are on the battlefield +1/+0 and charge for 1 mana. And basically what you tried to do is you just played a Starving Buzzard or 2, and then a whole bunch of 1 mana beasts like Timberwolves and Young Dragonhawks, stuff like that. Found your Unleash the Hounds, sent all your beasts at his face and killed him, and that was a sweet deck. But anyway, with Leroy plus Unleash the Hounds plus Timberwolves, or 1 or 2 of them, you can do upwards of 20 damage in 1 turn still. And I mean, with this deck, if you just shoot them every turn for the first 6 turns of the game, then you'll be able to do 20 damage to them. And one of the problems that I did run into was Priest Control. I lost 3 times to it, and I didn't beat it at all. That was by far my worst matchup, just because they not only have good ways of dealing with all your threats, but they also run Taunters, which is annoying. They run Defender of Argus Sunfury Protector, and they also have Heal as their ability, and they have Holy Fires in their deck, so it's a pretty difficult matchup. It's not impossible to win, but it's definitely pretty difficult. Anyway, continuing. So the other card that I didn't really talk about, and the other element to this deck is, or there's 2 more cards, but basically Arcane Shot, Kill Command, And I guess Wolf Rider, Leper Gnome, and Leroy all kind of do the same thing, though Leroy's usually just a finisher, and it has one other element to it. But, I mean, this is kind of just like extra damage that you do. It's sort of like a burn spell, but you have to attack, so it's a lot worse than something like Arcane Shot or Kill Command. Because it doesn't get through taunters. But basically, I almost never play my Kill Command or my Arcane Shots until the very end of the game, and I almost never hit their creatures with them. It makes sense to do so against decks that aren't running Taunt and that aren't running Defender of Argus. So when you're playing, when you match up against another aggro deck, fire away with the Arcane Shots. That's fine. But otherwise, you generally want to keep it and do as much damage as you possibly can to them, and then you sneak in the last points of damage behind their taunts. So you're going to play your Kill Commands and your Arcane Shots and stuff like that just to actually get the last 7-8 points of damage through. And you can do that in one turn. I mean, with a Kill Command, a Starving Buzzard, and a Steady Shot, that's 7 damage, and it's only for 7 mana. So a lot of the times, turn 7, that's all you really need to do. So 7, 7, 7, you know. And then the last, one of the last things is Leroy makes your opponent 2 1/1s, and this is just a pretty obvious interaction. Then you can just play Unleash the Hounds. So if you've got 9 mana, then you can Starving Buzzard, Leroy, Unleash the Hounds, and then still play a Timberwolf and get in for a lot of damage, because that's 5 1/1s that are all, or 5 creatures with charge that are all 2/1s, and then plus Leroy, that's 16 damage right there. And you also get to draw your cards if you don't have the Starving Buzzard, or if you don't need the cards and you have another Timberwolf, then that's just kind of absurd. Because you usually get about 5, because at that point in the game they usually have like 3 creatures. And there's one card here which really just changed the control matchups, other than Freezing Trap, which is Hunter's Mark, and there's only one of them in the deck. Everything in this deck is a 2 of except for this, and Leroy obviously can't play more than 1 Leroy. Otherwise, everyone would, and if you could play 2 of the same legendary in your deck, the game would be a lot worse. But anyway, continuing. Hunter's Mark. This card is so bad, but the awesome part about it is that if it's stuck in your deck, which is where you want it 95% of the time, then what you can do is you can play your Starving Buzzard, your Unleash the Hounds, try and fish for it. Hunter's Mark their Druid or whatever, their Druid of the Claw or something like that, or whatever their big taunter is at the time, and then just send 1 Hound at it. So you basically end up killing their biggest taunter for 0 mana, which is insane. But most of the time this card is complete garbage because you're not interacting with their creatures outside of your traps. And then I guess the last thing that I do want to talk about the traps is, or the secrets or whatever, is the poor interaction with them if you play them in the incorrect order. So they're always going to trigger, whichever one you played first is going to trigger first. So if you play Misdirection and then you play a Freezing Trap, here's what happens. They attack you. Your Misdirection, they attack you here. Your Misdirection triggers. They choose, the little circle thing goes around and they finally decide, settle on whatever target they want to hit. Then good old Freezing Trap will trigger, return the minion to its owner's hand, and you just wasted your Misdirection. So that's definitely something that's very important and that you need to note. Explosive Trap is a really interesting card because it's so good against the other aggro decks, and it's so bad against the control decks. Often enough, you just want to use the Explosive Trap for 2 things. You want to use it to pump your Secret Keeper, or give an extra durability to your Eaglehorn bow. And if you can do either of those things and it still does 2 damage to their face, then you did okay with your card. Obviously you want more out of your card than that, but often enough that is enough to balance it out, because it's obviously not going to be good in every deck, or against every deck, so that's fine. A third thing, or not a third thing, but another thing is when you are playing against Warlock, it's important to mulligan the cards that you think are bad against Warlock aggro, because playing against Warlock control is very easy. You almost always win that. They take a lot of damage themselves, even if the only way that you usually lose that one is if they draw both of their Molten Giants in the top like 12 cards of their deck and still have like a Sun Fury Protector or Defender of Argus or something like that. So they have to basically have both of those things in order for you to win. And even when they do, if you get a lucky hunter's mark or something like that, then you could still win the matchup. But basically what I'm trying to say is when you play against Warlock Control, you have a really good matchup, and it's really hard to lose that one anyway. So what you need to do is play Explosive Trap, or is like mulligan aggressively into Explosive Trap and keep your Explosive Trap, because you're going to be able to beat the Warlock Control even if you have a bad starting hand. But if you have a bad starting hand against the Warlock aggro decks, then you're going to be in really big trouble. So I think that's pretty much all I have to say. Just mulliganing with this deck is sometimes tough. You really have to decide what you want to keep. So like some matchups, you're going to want to keep Unleash the Hound, Starving Buzzard, or Timberwolf, whichever of the three you can find. You're going to want to keep all of those. And then there are some matchups where you just want some early pressure. So you want your Leper Gnomes, your Secret Keepers, Eaglehorn Bow plus traps, stuff like that, and you want to keep those kind of cards. But basically this tech took me from rank 4, since I had fallen down from rank 3 at some point. So it took me from rank 4 to Legendary in 45 games, which is pretty good, because when you think about it, the shortest amount of time from 4 1-star to Legend is what? So the rank 1 is 5 games, the rank 2 is 5 games, the rank 3 is 5 games, so that's 15, and so it's about 20. So it was about a little over twice as much as if I had gone on a 20 win streak, which is obviously impossible, or just pretty unlikely. So definitely recommend this deck. And I mean, I know just because of how many people after each game add you and then say your deck is awful, or you're a scrub, or you can't play. I know that this deck has a bad connotation to it for whatever reason, but I don't think this deck is quite as easy to play as people say. I don't think it's the hardest deck. I don't think it's nearly as hard as Rogue Miracle to play. But also another thing, I thought it would be amazing against Rogue Miracle, but I'm only 1-2 against them. But it could just be because my opponents were better who were playing that deck. That deck is so hard to pilot, and I think it's really impressive for anyone who is able to play that deck well. I would love to learn how to play it, but I still need to open a Van Cleef. Oh yeah, that's another thing. I did this without spending any money on Hearthstone. Hooray! Got a lot of cards through playing a lot of Arena. I'm almost at my 1000th Arena win, so that's also exciting. Thank you so much for watching this video and breakdown. And let me know if you want to see more kind of constructed stuff. If you want to see some gameplay with this, I could play it while in Legend, and I assume that people will want to see. But, you know, anyway, leave a comment. Would love to hear from you in any way, shape, or form. If you are going to say, Daisho, you're an idiot, this deck is the easiest deck to play, that's fine. I would love to hear your comments, and I will respond in kind, and I will either agree or disagree, depending on how good of an argument you make. I mean, if somebody really gives me a good argument for why this deck's easy to play, I am definitely willing to be persuaded. But after playing with it for a bunch, I think it's difficult. I think that I messed up a lot, and I could have done a lot better, even though it definitely did bail me out of a lot of situations. Thanks so much for watching. Have a wonderful day. Bye.